GraphDB 7, that's RDF data, or OpenRefine, or in other words, tabular data, CSV files, and so on. And then in Explore, we have everything that leads you to you viewing data without writing Sparkle. Then there's the Sparkle editor. So Sparkle is the only one that doesn't have sub-items in it. It's because Sparkle is a very central concept to RDF. That's why it's there on top and not under Explore. And then we have Monitor, which will lead you to resources monitoring. That's the resources on the machine running GraphDB, such as memory and so on, and query monitoring as well. And then we have Setup. So Setup groups everything that has to do with setting up things, be it a repository, a new user, or changing the security level of GraphDB, or a connector, or setting up the cluster, or adding or removing a namespace, or turning on or off the autocomplete index. And finally, there's the help menu that gives you access to the documentation of the Workbench REST API, as well as links to our GraphDB documentation that's hosted on our GraphDB website. And finally, in help, there's this very useful bit of information, system information to be more exact. And this is something that was there in GraphDB 7 as well. As you can see, it shows you the operating system, the version of Java, how much memory it uses, and so on, and then what arguments were used to start this particular installation. And then there was this configuration parameters tab that in GraphDB 7 wasn't very useful because it showed a bunch of things that you don't need to know about, or basically things that then don't need to be there. And that's why in GraphDB 8, this same tab, configuration parameters, shows you the actual configuration parameters for GraphDB. So if you're wondering where your data is, that is the repository data, you can see it here, or your config files, your log files, and so on. And it will also tell you if this particular setting is the default one or was provided explicitly through a configuration parameter. And now let's go back to the home screen. That's the other major difference between GraphDB 7 and GraphDB 8, the home screen. So in GraphDB 7, it mostly contains a bunch of links to documentation, and then information about the version, and then the license. However, in GraphDB 8, we decided to make this home screen much more useful. And one of the first things you'll see is this Welcome to GraphDB mini tutorial that you can use to quickly familiarize yourself with what you need to do first when you install GraphDB. So it contains information about creating a repository, and then loading data into this repository, and finally running Sparkle queries to get data out of the repository. And it also tells you that we have this REST API that you might want to use if you want to automate some operations. And if you've seen GraphDB before, you know how to use it, you can actually safely close this and never look at it again. And in order to show you what's actually so useful about the new home screen, and to show you anything about GraphDB, I have to create a repository. And in GraphDB 7, if we go back here, to create a repository, I had to go to admin and then locations and repositories. There is also this link here that's shown when I'm not connected to any repository. So regardless of whether I go through the menu or here, I'll get to this screen, and then in this screen, I have to click Create Repository. Now, if we go back to GraphDB 8, there is a direct link to creating a repository on the home screen, so I'm going to use that. And I get directly to the repository creation form, so I'm going to create a new repository called Webinar. And that's basically the only information that I need to enter here, so I can safely use the default options here. And I can either click the create button or press enter. So now I have this repository, but as you can see, I still haven't provided a license. So now if I try to use my repository, it will not work because I don't have a license. So let's actually provide a license. So to provide a license, you can click here, or there's actually one more way, but it's easiest to just click here. So every time there is something wrong with your license, such as a missing license in case of new installation, or an expired license, you'll see a warning about this in the top right corner. So it's very easy to notice when something's wrong with your license. So when you click set license, you can either upload the license file or paste the license code as it was sent to you by email. I'm going to upload the file because that's what I have. And here's my license file. So when you choose the file, it will show you the license information and ask you if that's correct. That's just because you might have multiple license files and you select the one. And I'm happy with this license. And as you can see, this set license button here disappeared. So now I'm all set, and I'm still not connected to any repository, so I have to connect to a repository, and I can do that either the way it was done in GraphDB 7. So let's go back to GraphDB 7. So in GraphDB 7, you could click here and then choose a repository, or go to admin, locations, and repository, and then click here to connect to a repository. Both of these options are still available in GraphDB 8. So here's this menu, and if I go to Setup Repositories, again here, the interface looks slightly different because we also redesigned icons and colors and all that. So you have to click on this plug here. But I'm going to show you the new way to do that. That's from the home screen. So all the repositories that you have access to are here, and I'm going to connect to this webinar that I just created. And as you can see, once I'm connected to a repository, I see a lot of new things on this home screen. So the first is this view resource, a text box that I can use to quickly find an RDF resource and view its data. And if I actually go there and start typing, I get a notification about autocomplete being off, and it suggests me to go to Setup Autocomplete to turn it on, and I just click there. And I'm going to turn on my autocomplete index now because it will be useful later when I'm showing you things. So if I click here, there it is. And then I can go back here. And now if I start typing, you'll see that things are shown here. But as I said, I'm going to show you this later. And then there are the saved Sparkle queries. Those are the same saved Sparkle queries that you can save and load into the Sparkle editor. They're basically here. So you can use this icon to save a query, and you can use this one to open a query. And you could do that from the Sparkle editor in GraphDB 7 as well. But in GraphDB 8, you can do it from the home screen too. So all of your saved queries are here, and you can just click execute on any of them. And when you click execute, it will open the Sparkle editor and execute that query immediately. So I'm going to do that now. And as you can see, it loaded the Sparkle query in a new tab with the name of the saved query, and then it showed me, it executed the query and then showed me the results. So now that we have a repository, sorry, I'm just going to show something else before that. As you can see, for the currently connected repository, we also get this card-like box here that shows us the number of statements in the repository. And since this is a new repository that's empty, there are only 70 inferred statements. So those are basically system statements that GraphDB needs to do inference properly, and there are 0 explicit ones. So So now let's load some data. And to load some data, we go to import and then RDF. And then this screen is exactly as it was in GraphDB 7, so nothing new here. I want to import a server file. So that's a file that I've put in this directory, and it's just a very small subset of Wikipedia that contains information about countries and continents. And to import, I click this button here, and then I can enter some optional information. What I want to provide is the context, because I will need so the context corresponds to the name graph that you want your data loaded into, and since I need some name graph, that's why I'm entering it here. So as you can see, it's importing now, showing you that it's importing, and then a new feature in GraphDB 8 is that all the imports are also shown in this status panel in the top right corner. So now I can go to other screens, and it will still show me that something is being imported. I can even go to the Sparkle editor and run some queries, and it's importing all that. And if you click here, it will open the import. Oops, sorry, import is done now. But if I click there, it would have opened import RDF again in a new tab. So let's actually go back there and see what's there. As you can see, it shows me that this was imported successfully in about 30 seconds. And if we now go back to the home screen, first of all, we see that there are a lot more statements now in our repository. And second, if I again use this view resource field and start typing, for example, BULG, because I want to look at the Wikipedia resource for Bulgaria, and as you can see, it's autocomplete, and I can select Bulgaria from this list. And when I do that, it will show me all the triples for Bulgaria. Okay. So let's go to the Sparkle editor, and I'm going to close this tab. And okay. So another useful thing in GraphDB 8 is when you run a query, I'm going to simulate a long-running query by writing something that will just run for a long time. So this basically multiplies all the data once and then again and then again. And then counts all the statements. So we have like 400,000 statements. So that would be 400,000 to the power of 3, and it will take quite some time to actually look through them. That's why this query is going to run for a long time. And when I execute the query, you see our loader here. So that means the query is being evaluated. But again, something new pops up here in the top right corner. That's the status of running queries. And if I click here, it will open a new tab with query monitoring. So query monitoring is also accessible through monitor queries. But instead, I'm going to click here because now my query is running. So I click here. And it opens query monitoring with this query. And in my other tab where I started my query, it's still running. So let's say that I've been waiting now for almost a minute, and I think I no longer need that data, so I need to abort this query. So we just tweak the screen a bit. It shows more of the query as well as the lifetime in human readable form, because before it only showed seconds, now it shows you, actually before it showed milliseconds, as you can see in this tooltip here, but now it shows you human readable time. And if you're no longer happy with this query, you can abort it. And first of all, note that the query ID is 74, and it's been running for a minute and a half about. So now if I click abort and then I confirm, So what happened now is that this here changed to 75 and the counter restarted. That's because my original query was aborted successfully. But then the Sparkle editor starts another query to actually count the number of results. So I can show you showing 1 to 1,000 from that many results. So this second query is automatically run by the Sparkle editor and it expires in 10 seconds. So if you see a query and it doesn't disappear immediately, that's because you're seeing the count query. And we're going to change that in a future version, of which I'm going to talk about later if I have time. So, but in other words, it's really useful to always see your running queries from any screen, and you'll see even queries run by other people, just because multiple people can use the same GraphDB instance at the same time. Okay, now let's go back quickly to GraphDB 7. So in GraphDB 7, under data, we have two submenus called export and context. And if we look at them, so I have to select the repository. So I have the same webinar repository here with the same data that I loaded in my GraphDB 8 installation, just to show you the same thing in both versions of GraphDB. And in the export view, you could see all the named graphs in the repository, and then export each named graph in all the supported formats. Or you could export the whole repository in all the supported formats. And then in the context menu, you see again all the named graphs in the repository, and you could clear a specific name graph or clear the whole repository. So basically both views show you the named graphs, and in one view you can export and in the other view you can clear data. That means delete data. And that's why in GraphDB 8 we decided to unify those two into a single view that's now under Explore Graphs Overview. So in Graphs Overview, you will see all the name graphs as well as the default graph. So I'll explain about the default graph in a bit. And you can do everything that you could do in the old export and context views. So you can either export something or remove data from that name graph or from the whole repository. And again, it's in all the supported formats. And unlike the previous views from GraphDB 7, in GraphDB 8, we now have the default graph as well as all the name graphs. So default graph is a special graph that doesn't have a name. That's why we called it the default graph. That's the proper term. And the default graph is where all your data goes to unless you specified something else. So whenever you import data or insert data and you didn't tell GraphDB to use a specific name graph, it will go into the default graph. And let's see what happens if I clear the repository in GraphDB 7. So I'm in the right view, and I click this icon here. So now I deleted all the data, and it tells me no context in the selected repository. And let's do the same thing in GraphDB 8. So if I click this button here, I will do exactly the same operation. And as you can see, the default graph is still visible even after I cleared the repository. That's because the default graph is always there. Okay, let's move on to cluster management. So before I show you cluster management, I need to create some repositories for it. I'm just going to delete this webinar repository because I don't need it anymore. Oh, by the way, before I go on to cluster, I'd like to mention that repositories management view has been simplified since GraphDB 7. So before it was called locations and repositories, and now it's just repositories. So locations represented in GraphDB 7, locations represented either directories on the machine running GraphDB where you could store data, and you could attach any directory, or you could connect to a remote GraphDB installation. In GraphDB 8, you can still connect to a remote GraphDB installation, but you can only use a single local directory. And that's because the local directory is configured through a GraphDB property, and everything in GraphDB, be it the Workbench, the engine, or any tools such as LoadRDF will use the same directory if you use the property. That's why it's no longer possible to connect to add any arbitrary directory on your hard disk. But if you upgrade to GraphDB 8 from a previous version and you have such locations, they'll still be in the list and they'll still be usable. So if you have them, they will continue to work. So I'm just going to delete this repository, and then for the cluster, I'm going to show you a very typical cluster setup that consists of 3 workers and 2 masters. So I will need 3 worker repositories and 2 master repositories. And normally in a production system, you will need 5 separate GraphDB installations, because in a cluster you actually want to have different machines, because if one of the machines fails, then you rely on the other machines. But for the sake of showing you how it works, it can do fine with just a single machine. So I'm going to create my worker repositories now. As I mentioned earlier, you can either click the create button, or you can press enter, and it's much easier to press enter. So there's one worker repository, and the second, and finally the third worker repository. And then I will need 2 master repositories as well, which are created through the same form, but you have to change the type here from GraphDB worker to GraphDB master. And finally, I need my second master as well. There, I have now 3 worker repositories and 2 master repositories. And if I want to create a cluster now, in the past, you had to set up JMX and then do some magic with JConsole, so it wasn't very obvious how to do it. And at some point in GraphDB 7, we introduced the cluster management in the GraphDB Workbench, but cluster management wasn't completely functional, so you could create only simple clusters consisting of a single master. But now in GraphDB 8, we've extended the implementation to allow to create any kind of supported clusters. So the cluster I'm going to show you consists of 3 worker nodes and 2 master nodes, where each worker is connected to each master, and then the 2 masters are connected to each other. Sounds a bit complicated, but you'll see when I do it that it's very easy and straightforward. So to create things in the cluster management view, you click either on a worker or on a master, and then drag the mouse while keeping the button pressed onto the other thing. So if I want to connect worker 3 to master 2, I just click on worker 3, keep the button pressed, and then I drag the mouse to the master, and then I release the button, and the color of these lines between the nodes corresponds to the actual status, and it changes whenever the status changes. So you see it immediately on the screen. As you noticed, when I did that, it was red in the beginning, and then it became green. So red means off, and then green means on. So when you connect things, the initial status that you see could be either see, for the second one, it turned green immediately. So I've now connected one worker to 2 of the masters, to the two masters, and I need to do the same for the other two workers. There. And finally, my third worker. So don't worry if the things don't turn green immediately. The customer might need some time to initialize and set up and communicate all that information. As you can see, they are turning green. And finally, you have to connect the two masters to each other, which is again done by dragging and dropping. So now I have a cluster now, and the final thing, the very final thing left to do is to set one of the masters as read only and mute. That's because if you need to know why that needs to be done, you just you can use our documentation and read about supported cluster topologies. But the important thing here is that in GraphDB 7, you couldn't do that through the cluster management view. You had to still use JMX and JConsole. And now in GraphDB 8, you can simply click on a master, and then the two options, read only and mode, are here. So I'm just going to set it to read only and mute. And whenever you change those settings, the affected master will have these two icons. And pencil with the X means it's read only, and the speaker with the X means it's mute. And this is everything I needed to do to set up my cluster. And now let's check if this works. So if we go to the Sparkle editor, it tells me no repository selected, so I have to select one of the masters. Say I select master 1, and then I execute a simple query. And as you can see, it returns results. My cluster is working. So let's move on to the final major, actually that's the biggest new feature in GraphDB 8. It's OpenRefine. As you remember, when I first told you about new menu structure, under import there was this tabular OpenRefine thing. And if we go there, you get to OpenRefine. So OpenRefine is basically OpenRefine, and OpenRefine is in turn previously called Google Refine. So it's Google Refine, then OpenRefine, and then OntoRefine. And OntoRefine can do everything that OpenRefine can, but with some additional benefits that you're going to see in a bit. And all the Star Refine programs support importing data in various formats. As you can see here, the formats are listed. And for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to use a very simple CSV file. So I click on this icon here to select my file, and the file I have is a list of US presidents that was taken from some free repository of CSV data. And then to actually import the file, I press next. So Refine is really good at determining the right settings for a given CSV file, because those can vary quite a bit. And it correctly figured out that my file is delimited by commas, and that the first line of my file is the column headers, and so on. And if you're happy with this preview here, you don't have to do anything. You can just click Create Project. Or if you see something wrong, you can tweak with these settings to get Refine to parse your file correctly. So it looks fine to me. That's why I'm just going to click on Create Project. And there is my CSV data. And at this point, I think this looks the screen looks kind of too narrow to me. So it's the right time to show you another cool thing in GraphDB 8. If you are already familiar with this menu structure, you can press this icon here to collapse the menu and get more screen space. And at this point in OpenRefine, you can apply all the transformations supported by OpenRefine as well, such as editing things or normalizing data or whatever. And so what's the difference between OnToRefine and OpenRefine? It's the thing is that we wanted to have something that provides converts tabular or legacy data to RDF, and that's what our OnToRefine can do. Unlike the standard OpenRefine, we have this sparkle button here, and if we press this button, we get to a Sparkle editor. Note that this Sparkle editor isn't the same as the one available from the Sparkle menu. So if it says OnToRefine here on top, it's the OnToRefine Sparkle editor. And if I execute this very simple query here that just selects everything, I get some RDF data that's converted from the tabular data that I imported into Refine. So if we go back to the table and look at the first row, that's George Washington, the first US president, and that's his name, Wikipedia link, and then the date he took office, left office, the party that supported him, and then there's a picture and his home state. If we go back to the Sparkle editor and look at the actual data that we selected, we see that that's actually George Washington. And for each row in the CSV file, we've generated a bunch of RDF statements where the subject is based on the row number, such as URN row 1 for George Washington. And then it's of type row, and then there is this automatic predicate row number, because you might want to have that as a number instead of having to pass it from the URI. And then for each column in the CSV file, we created predicates that correspond to the actual data. So for example, for the name, so that column, if we go back to the table, so the column with the name is called president, and correspondingly, our property is called URN column as in the symbol column, and then column as in COL, abbreviation from the word column, and then so it's URN col president. And note that this data is taken directly from the imported CSV file in Refine. So whenever you edit something in OnToRefine, so let's try to edit George Washington's name to George Washington II. And as you can see, it changed here. And if we go back to the Sparkle editor and then run the same query again, you see that you immediately get the change in your RDF data. So this RDF data is still only into OnToRefine and not in your GraphDB repository. So how to get it there? Oh, it's very easy. So first you need to get this Sparkle endpoint link by clicking here, and it's something that you have to copy, which I just did. And then you need to go to the other Sparkle editor. So that's the Sparkle and the main Sparkle editor of GraphDB, the one that uses the currently connected repository. And this is still my one of the masters from the cluster I created earlier, so I'm just going to use that. And in Sparkle, there is many people don't know about that, but in Sparkle you can connect from so you can run your queries against one repository directly, but you can also connect to remote Sparkle endpoints within the same query. This is done by wrapping your statement patterns into the service keyword. And for the service keyword, you need to provide the URL to the remote endpoint. And this is exactly the URL that I copied just a bit ago from the OnToRefine. And now if I run this query, I get the data that's in my OnToRefine project. So this this number here in the URL actually corresponds to the project ID from OpenRefine. And this is a select. I can do all kinds of selects here, but it's still not in my GraphDB repository. In order to get it there, I have to do an insert. And the simplest insert you could do is this. So this will basically take everything from the remote endpoint, in our case, the OpenRefine endpoint, and then insert exactly the same data into the current GraphDB repository. And as you can see, the subjects here are called URN row 1, 2, 3, and so on, which might be useful for some cases, but most often you need to modify your data a bit, for example, generate different URIs or so. And we have a very nice tutorial on YouTube for how to do such things with OpenRefine, and you can also look at our documentation for more information about OpenRefine. That's why I'm showing you here only a very simple insert, just to show you that you can get the data from the CSV into the GraphDB repository. And now if I execute this insert statement, I have about 400 statements that were inserted into GraphDB. And if we go back here to the home screen, you'll see that this has changed. We only had 70 statements before that because I had created the cluster with new and empty repositories. And again, those 484 explicit statements came from Refine, and these 19 third ones are either inferred statements or system statements that are needed for inference to work. And if we now go to, let's say we use this, let's go back to the Spark editor. And if you remember that the property name for the name of the president was called this, you could do a select like this. And this should return you the names of all the presidents as well as the URI. And if we execute this query, we now get so the URI for each president and the name for each president. And now this data came from my GraphDB repository and not from Refine. So if I now go back to OpenRefine and change George Washington's name again, it will not change in the GraphDB repository. You have to import the data again in order to get that change. And since we have some time left, I'm going to show you a quick sneak peek into GraphDB 8.1. So that's the next minor release of GraphDB, and some cool new features there. So GraphDB 8.1 will not look much different from GraphDB 8.0, but there are some cool new changes. So for example, if you remember my long-running query from here, I'm just going to copy paste it. And this is GraphDB 8.1, the future one. And if I execute it, so we've added this little timer here when you execute the query, or be it a query or an update. So if it's a query, it will say evaluating query and then show you the time. Or if it's an update, it will show you executing update and again show you the time. And this is very convenient when you're waiting for something to return results and you've been wondering. Oh, of course, not all queries take such a long time, but some of them do. And it's convenient to know how much time something has taken so far. Okay. And so what I wanted to show is another thing that we've added to GraphDB 8.1 is this icon here. So just to compare, in GraphDB 8.0 it's not there, so we have 4 of them here, and we have a 5th one in 8.1. So what the 5th one does, it in its default state, it will expand results over same as. If you don't know what same as is, it's still easy to understand, just by showing you this quick example. So since I have DBpedia here as well, and let's ask what's the capital of Bulgaria. Yeah, it's like this. And in its default state, GraphDB will just return 2 things here. So that's DBR Sofia, that's the correct entry that comes from DBpedia. But there is also this geodata thing with a number. And that's because in the data that we've loaded, it's not just DBpedia, but it's more than one data set. And the proper way to connect data sets in RDF is by adding a statement that says Sofia is the same as geodata or whatever. And very often when you combine multiple data sets, you get a bunch of duplicated information. So in order to get only a single copy of your data, what you could do before is manually add this from onto disable same as. And if you execute this, you get only DBR Sofia. So what this new icon does is it will add from onto disable same as to you, so you don't have to type it. So if we go back like this, and now if I click this icon, it will change like this. So the idea is that you had multiple things before, and when it's off, you only get a single thing. And if I execute the query, you only get DBR Sofia. And finally, from the sneak peek, I'm going to show you something that's, oops, sorry. Okay, what I'm going to show you now is so new that we're not even sure it will be in GraphDB 8.1. Okay. So for quite some time now, we wanted to implement some visual representation of graph data in GraphDB, and we finally got to doing it. So this is our initial work on visualizing graph data. So that's basically things that got in shape just end of past week and the beginning of this week. So it's very, very new. And so as I mentioned, I have DBpedia here. So I'm going to show you first what happens. Again, I have the autocomplete index. So it's a very useful thing whenever you have data with meaningful URIs. I suggest you use the autocomplete index because it's very easy to find stuff. And actually, onto text is on DBpedia. So here it is. And when I select the resource, that's my initial resource. And when I click on it, it will expand and show me other resources that are connected to onto text through some properties. And so what we see here now is that, of course, not everything is perfect. As I said, it's very, very early work. But it's very cool because you immediately see things that are associated with onto text, such as text mining, semantic web, triple store, linked data, open data, semantic technology. There is Bulgaria and Sofia as well. And even our CEO, Atanas Kyriakov, is down here. So, and then you can continue expanding stuff by clicking on things, but for that I'm going to show you another resource. So Donald Trump has been very popular in the past couple of months. is on the Wikipedia as well. And when you select Donald Trump, you get a bigger circle. That's because obviously Donald Trump is more important than on text. Again, you can click on Donald to make him explode. And as you can see, the expanded Donald has some other things such as Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, and there is Ivanka Trump as well, Fred Trump, Republican Party, University of Pennsylvania, and so on. And what you can actually, I'm just going to scale this down a bit. If I click on one of the other nodes now, say I click on Donald Trump Jr., that you expand that as well. And since this is initial work, things get on top of each other, so it's not very good yet, but it will get there. And as you can see, there's Donald Trump, and it was connected to Donald Trump Jr., and Donald Trump Jr. is connected to Melania Trump as well. And of course, Donald is connected to Melania, but must be here somewhere. And that was everything from me for today. So do you have any questions?
In fact, there are a couple of good questions. I sort of sorted them out by how easy you can answer them, because there's one pretty straightforward that you just answered. Can the data be visualized as a graph? And the obvious question is yes, but it will come in the future edition of GraphDB, I guess.
Yes.
Another question, actually, I don't think that has an easy answer. Can GraphDB replace the triple store, and if so, can it connect to .NET RDF library?
Well, GraphDB is a triple store. So anything that can store RDF triples is a triple store, and some triple stores are better than others. And we believe that our triple store GraphDB is better than other triple stores. So yes, it can replace other triple stores. And I've not worked directly with the .NET RDF library, so I can't tell you much. But GraphDB is based on RDF4J, which is a Java library, but since it supports an HTTP protocol, it's very easy to talk to it through other libraries as well.
Okay, thank you. Another one from a user who has downloaded GraphDB 7 and has saved multiple queries on GraphDB 7. Can they migrate them to the new version?
Yes, actually, all of the settings that you get in GraphDB 7 will be there when you upgrade to GraphDB 8. So you don't have to do anything in particular. Everything that was there will be there.
Another question that I think, well, it needs a webinar or a demonstration on its own. How do you design a cluster structure? How do you answer that?
Okay, there is also another question about the cluster, about the direction of connecting workers to masters. So how you design a cluster, I'm not sure I understand the question, but there are different cluster topologies that we support. You can read about them in our documentation. And each of them is suited to a different use case, and every one of them has both its pluses and minuses, so you have to decide for yourself, as well as for connecting them using the cluster management interface. It doesn't matter in what direction you drag them, because logically you, not logically, physically you connect, you tell the master, please connect to this worker, and this is what always happens regardless of whether you start from the worker or from the master when you drag and drop. And in the case of masters, when masters are connected, they are connected bidirectionally. So master 1 is connected to master 2 and vice versa.
Okay. Well, a very concerned user, just to confirm, when they upgrade from 7 to 8, their queries are not lost, right?
Yes, your saved queries will be there when you upgrade from GraphDB 7 to GraphDB 8. We always strive to preserve settings, and in some cases need to convert them and so on. But in your case, I can guarantee you that your saved queries will be there.
Okay. I think we have a few more questions that we won't be able to answer at the moment, address live, but you'll certainly receive answers via email when we're sending out recording and a bunch of links that I will also include in the email, such as the separate OpenRefine tutorial that Pavel mentioned. So I think we can conclude the session, and I wanted to thank Pavel again for this nice introduction into the new Workbench, and I also wanted to thank all of you for joining and for staying until the very end. For us, it's almost 7, maybe for some of you, it's the beginning of the day. Expect the email, and in this email, you'll get everything you need from this, such as the recording, the tutorials, and a bunch of other links. And we'll see you next time. Actually, to use the opportunity to promote our next webinar, which is at the end of January, GraphDB Fundamentals. It's more of a presentation. It's very basic and introductory, but it's good for people who are not very familiar with semantic technology and with semantic graph databases, because it gives you really the fundamentals, the fundamentals of how it all works. It's less practical, but it's also very good. Well, thank you again, and we'll hope to see you next time.